I want to start by just reminding ourselves why these conversations matter. A few months ago in Rwanda, I had the opportunity to visit a rural area in the Eastern Province. And while I was there, I met a woman at a meeting called Marie-José. We were talking about cooking energy and how we can set up some cooking energy for the community. She said to me, every morning I wake up and go out to look for firewood. And as I'm looking for firewood, I compete with men who are twice your size. Sometimes I get the firewood, but other times I don't. And I have 4 children. I'm a single mother. On those days when I don't get the firewood, my children go to bed without food. She also said, if you look at some of the girls who've got babies on their backs, some of them were raped on the way to look for firewood. Now, that is outrageous because these are issues that we can solve. These are problems that we can solve. And today, our esteemed panel here is going to be discussing with you how we can start to solve those problems so that people like Marie-José don't have to go through these issues, don't have to go through these problems. In the last 2 days, we've looked at the numbers and we've heard the numbers. 2.8 trillion. That's how much Africa needs to cope with our nationally determined contributions. We've only been able to raise 250 billion per year, far too short of what we need. Where is the rest going to come from? What can we do? How do we industrialize when we've got these shortfalls? How do we start to make a difference in the lives of the Marie-Josés of Africa? So let's get into it because we've got an interesting panel today. Now, each panelist will respond to a set of questions. We've designed this so that it's conversational and perhaps not as heavy as the other sessions that you've been listening to. I'll start with you, Mr. Mrefu. If you can tell us, why does this matter? Why does this conversation matter? As someone who's deeply involved in the renewable energy sector in Africa, what key obstacles have you seen in harnessing local energy and local renewable energy to meet Africa's industrial needs? And are there any tips that you can give us without needing to wait for the sun to rise on a solution?
Yeah, thank you very much, Maxwell. And also thank you very much to the organizers of this event for having me. My name is Murefu Barasa, and I'm the managing partner at EED Advisory. EED Advisory is a Pan-African consulting company offering services in energy, water, and climate change. I also happen to be the chairperson of the Kenya Renewable Energy Association. So going straight to the point on the potential of renewable energy, I think it's important to start by saying there are generally 2 types of renewable energy when you think about renewable energy for electricity. So you have the dispatchable generation, which provides farm power. So here you have technologies like hydro or geothermal. And then you have variable renewable energy like solar and wind. So for example, right now, based on the cloud cover, if you have solar and it's 100 megawatts, you don't expect to get 100 megawatts. That's a variability of solar. But if you have 100 megawatts of gas, you're able to get 100 megawatts anytime you need it. So gas is farm power, wind and solar is variable. So the challenges are different. And I've seen very many countries are investing in variable renewable energy. One of the first challenges is managing the variability. Many of the sub-Saharan African countries have very weak and rudimentary grids. So we don't have very many cases of having smart grids, and managing variable renewable energy becomes very, very difficult. The second challenge, which is the perennial challenge, is a question of finance. There's a risk, but then there's also the perception of risk. And I think the perception of risk in Africa is perhaps the bigger problem. Because of the perception of risk, then we have to borrow at significantly higher interest rates, making our projects very, very uncompetitive. And then also there's a global shift because the financing is turning green. Most of the capital from the West now insists on funding renewable energy technology, which puts some countries at a disadvantage because they may not have the resources that other countries have. And then finally is the energy transition. So we talk about energy transition a lot, but the energy transition in Africa is fundamentally different from the energy transition in the global north in this sense. In the global north, they already have attained universal access to electricity. Everybody has electricity. They have a mature grid. In the global south and in Africa, we have 600 billion people without electricity. So we are growing our capacity as we transition to renewable energy, and the differences are fundamentally different. So in terms of what can be done, adopting new technologies, so there's a lot of testing with battery storage, there's a lot of testing with smart grids, and there's a lot of testing with combination of variable renewable energy and gas technologies. Let me stop there in the interest of time.
Thank you. I mean, all of this sounds sensible, and I'm wondering why it's not happening. But before we go there, let me pick up on one of the points that you made around global financing. Dr. Singh, let me come back to you, Landry. Given your expertise in global economy and Africa's development, why do you think global financing? Yeah, is online. Oh, he's online. Why do you think global financing commitments for Africa's energy access has been slow? Is he connected? Maybe not. Let me go to you, Dominic. Would you like to attempt that, or we can move on to, because I really wanted to tap on your expertise and understand better how Africa can ensure that partnerships for green energy investments don't just blow away like the wind. How can we take advantage of these partnerships and enable them some more?
Okay, well, thank you very much. Yes, my name is Dominic Chinko. I'm the interim executive director of AEC. Our job is to, including at this workshop, is for me to listen to everything that is said and build the capacity of African researchers to do the analysis to inform policy. To respond directly to the question, we know we have seen an increase in the investment in renewable. Most of that has come from a non-traditional investor like China. The first thing is, do we fully understand that non-traditional partner? So we need to take the time to better understand where the Chinese are coming from, what they are doing. Once we do that, the next step would be to see what's the strategy for we to get the benefits that can come from renewable energy. On that, I would say it really means then that we need to unpack again what comes in that partnership. We know that Chinese sometimes come with their own labor. That's something that we need to make sure then that the African labor is involved in it. We need to train our workers to be able to work in this. In fact, I would be ready to say, let's even limit the share of foreign labor that come into it, or ensure then that if they do come with their labor, there are conditions for transfer of knowledge and things like that, because that's quite important. The technology is the same element. We then need to make sure that we learn and understand the technology that they are using. And then the third element for us at AEC, it is crucial to have primary data economic data, but even social economic data. Because like what we are doing and will be continuing doing is basically to put together a data set to make sure then that we can analyze based on facts and elements that will make sure that we understand. The last one is really to have conducive policy to make sure then that we can have the relevant policy, we can change our policy infrastructure such that then it enables us to better harness the benefits that come with renewable energy.
Thank you. Let me push back a little bit on what you said there. I did not hear you talk about partnerships amongst African countries within Africa. And yet, we are seeing the same Chinese that you talked about go to Zimbabwe, go to Uganda, go to the DRC to mine coltan. Why are African countries not getting into partnerships? Or indeed, the African Union, in whose building we are today, why do they not find it appropriate to form a vehicle that can enable them to invest in the coltan in Zimbabwe and not have the Chinese come and do so that the money stays on the continent here? Why is that not happening?
Let's say that some of the elements of that is taking place. I agree fully that the analysis that we should be doing should make sure then that we know that the renewable energy is not something that can be done in one country, even in Nigeria. We then need to take a regional or continental perspective. Like even when we want to look at the financing asset is coming into renewable from China, it's really to make sure that our regional development banks also can come into this such that then we can really pull together our strength. And also related to that, and the analysis that I would say with the data that I was mentioning, is basically we then really need to have a full understanding of the political economy of having the renewable energy at the national and the regional level, because where we want to move to that in that direction, the interest group that come at play a change, and unless we have a full understanding of the interest group that are behind the renewables, both from the continent African perspective, and from the non-African partners, then it will be a bit difficult to really fully harness the benefit of renewable energy.
Good. Moses, why is the private sector not coming to the party here? At least to the extent that we would have expected them to be coming and investing.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much, Maxwell. My name is Moses Jenga. I'm a policy analyst at KIPRA. KIPRA stands for Kenya Institute for Public Policy Research and Analysis. This is a government think tank. And our mission is to offer public policy advice to the government of Kenya. And we do that through two ways. One of them is through conducting objective policy research and analysis, and also through capacity building. Turning to the question on the table, I think the cardinal thing with the private investment is to get returns from their money. And the only way they do this is when they have a conducive business environment. Without that, then we are not going to see any investments flourishing or coming in. Most of the time we have been focusing on foreign investors, forgetting about our local investors. Here in this forum, we have been emphasizing on our own African investors, focusing on micro and small and medium enterprises. We need to really create conducive environment for these enterprises to flourish. If we are going to have a stable and stable industrialization, we really need to focus on the issues that really matter for our people, micro, small, and medium enterprises. And after that, we don't stop there. We need, as Prof said, data to monitor the progress of all the interventions that we are making. Because most of the time we put in interventions and forget and hope that everything will be working. No, we need frequent data to tell us where we, as far as interventions that we are putting, are either working so that we make timely interventions. So the issue of conducive business environment is key for any investment decisions that is going to be made. And as in the spirit of this forum, the focus should be on the micro and small and medium enterprises, where our people are, because we are building industrialization with our people and for our people.
So Moses, make me understand this. Murefu has just said that some of the risk is just a perception. And you say the perception of risk is part of the problem that we have here. But you seem to be confirming that our environment is not right. Who should I believe here?
We need to re-energize it, make it super for our people. You know, we can always perfect what we have.
So the environment is not good. What can give us examples in what we can do?
For example, the issues that affect business, business environment, you need to look at it from two angles: ease of doing business and also the cost of doing business. For example, energy costs, they really impact on businesses. So how do we deal with that? We really need to devise ways. And as my colleague from Kenya is saying, we really need to foster the shift from high cost to low cost energy production costs. So these are the issues that we really need to look into to make our business environment better and flourish for our people.
Good. Murefu, I'll give you a chance to speak to that. But Dominic, in your experience, what innovative business models should we be plugging into here to drive real industrialization?
Well, I think the first thing is to start by getting over the myth that environmental greening of industrialization can be an obstacle to economic transformation. We should basically take it as an opportunity for economic transformation. But what does that mean? I would say is, can we define natural resource value chain, where basically we invest in terms of policy to make sure then that we can connect to market, we can make sure then that we integrate, and then we can also take advantage of that. Let's take also the issue of urbanization in our countries. I come from Cameroon. The cities are quite dirty because we don't see the negative impact of that. If we were to basically start looking at the greening of our urbanization as a process that is necessary to achieve the sustainable development goal, that will be one way to go. The second element is related to the first point I mentioned, is greening industrialization should be mainstream in our industrialization and economic transformation process. Because again, if it becomes a footnote, if it's seen as something coming from international community, and then we don't fully integrate it in our ecosystem, then it will be a bit difficult to harness the opportunity that will come with renewable energy.
Thank you. I hope the person who presented this morning on greening the European Green Deal was listening to you, because you're saying going green is not a tax to industrialization of Africa. So maybe we can have an interesting conversation. Let me come back to you, Mrefu. Can you shed some light and give us some examples of how Kenya is leveraging mini grids and other renewable sources for its industrial growth? So we all understand that these things have a grounding in reality.
Right. Let me just touch on one question that you asked on collaboration. So there's a lot of interesting initiatives around the East Africa Power Pool, which is a collaboration of the countries in East Africa, and also the East Africa Power Pool and the South Africa Power Pool. In fact, there's a transmission line that's going to connect the two grids. And then there's also the Africa Single Electricity Market Initiative. So to your question on, is there collaboration? I would say yes, but there's more that needs to be done. And then to your question, so Kenya at the moment generates about 90%, more than 90% of its electricity from renewable energy. It's one of the highest percentages in the world. And the government of Kenya has decided to position the country as the go-to place for green industrialization and green manufacturing. So why is that important? In the late 80s and the early 90s, China positioned itself as the place to go if you're looking for affordable labor. And a lot of manufacturing moved to China. And now because of climate change and the awareness around climate change, and now, for example, you have the EU CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which will tax products that are shipped into the EU. More and more entities, more and more companies, including even global brands like Apple, they want to go green. So they're asking themselves, where can we manufacture products using green electricity? And that's what Kenya is trying to do. So Kenya has come up with this Kenya Energy Transition and Investment Plan, which looks to be carbon neutral by 2050. So there's lots of initiatives around there. Related to that, there's initiatives around green hydrogen. So positioning the country to be the green destinations. Other countries are also doing the same, including Ethiopia, which has a lot of renewable energy resources, Mozambique, DRC as well.
And that can be replicated across the continent, you believe. Before you answer that, if anyone has a question, the next few minutes I want to spend looking forward into the future. If you have a question, I'll be happy to take one or two. Is that something that can be replicated?
So it's sort of a philosophical question. You know, it depends whether you're an optimist or a pessimist. But the way I would look at it from a technical perspective, the countries I've just mentioned have significant amount of dispatchable renewable energy. And by that, I mean hydro and geothermal. If you look at Ethiopia, Mozambique, DRC, Kenya, and so they can provide baseload power and farm power using those kinds of renewable, but that does not exist in every country. So wind and solar, you know, by and large, you can find in most countries. And using that for manufacturing is not impossible, but it's significantly more difficult in terms of integration and even the cost. So there's this misunderstanding, because I see many publications now say things like solar and wind is cheaper than gas. That's not an accurate statement, because they're only looking at the capex, the cost of installing the plant. But the cost of running the plant, the cost of managing a solar and wind farm of 100 megawatts versus gas of 100 megawatts, if you're trying to meet, say, 100 megawatts of demand, is significantly different. And with the variable renewable energy, it's significantly more expensive.
That is an important distinction. Anyone got a question before we move forward here? Okay, we'll take one over there.
Thank you. My name is Francis Waswa. I work with UNDP Uganda. Mine is not a question, but a comment. I'm wondering whether we have the right policy, or are we asking the right policy question? Because when it comes to renewable energy, I think there is a problem we are focusing so much on access to power, just to get light in the house. And I think that is keeping private sector out. Maybe there is a need to focus on ability to pay and the productive use of that power. Because if we focus on productive use and this household is able to use this electricity to generate some income, then the private sector has some belief and trust that this household can now afford to pay. So maybe we also need to think of ability to pay, productive use of this power, and maybe issues of financial inclusion when it comes to this renewable energy. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we asking the right policy question here? Anyone wants to take it?
Well, I can try. Are we asking the right question? Maybe if I can put it differently. Given that, as I said, this is kind of a new area, I would say, are we investing enough to understand the policies that have worked elsewhere, where it has failed, and how we can benefit, we can learn from how they failed. From my point of view, we still have a lot to invest in basically understanding the best practice in policy making for promoting renewable energy. Both best practice in Africa, including with our SMEs, but also elsewhere. So I think we are not yet asking the full spectrum of question, because we are still learning what are the real benefits, what are the policies that have worked, how did other people fail, or the conditions being created in Africa to benefit from renewable. So I think those are some of my comments with his comment.
Thank you. Moses, take us into the future here. Given this significant gap between current financial flows, as we had in the morning, and what is needed for Africa's green transition, what new sources of financing should we be exploring?
Thank you. I think one of the new source of financing, it may not be new, but is to seal the leakages that are happening in Africa. Because I believe we have resources, but they are being misused and squandered. If you look at corruption in Africa, and it is costs, the last time I checked on the figures, the African continent is, corruption is costing about 140 billion US dollars. So, and we have seen money being put into foreign accounts, being siphoned from Africa to other foreign accounts. If you read the Transparency International report, the latest, Africa, the sub-Saharan Africa score an average of 32%. That is twice lower than the best doing region. Why are we not sealing these leakages that are happening? Yet these are our resources. We don't need to go and borrow. We first use what we have.
Thank you. I will come back to you on that. I admit that corruption is a problem and we must do something about it. But give me one example or two examples of something that we have the power to change tomorrow in this room here when we go back to our workplace, notwithstanding the importance of stemming corruption. But let me know, before you do that, I want you to think a little bit about that. Dominic, in light of the challenges we had today and we had yesterday, how can African countries align their industrial strategy so we can get to a future where renewable energy and the green transition is a reality?
Well, I would say first, skill, capacity. So basically, we need to invest in the capacity development for understanding the renewable energy, formulating the policy, and things like that. To do that, the second element is we really need to overhaul our school system, both the general education, but also the technical education. So I would think that we need a lot of catch up to do to make sure then that we are prepared to understand the technology that comes with the renewable energy and to be able to bring the necessary investment and expertise into it. The third element is I will use the framework that His Excellency Ibrahim Sall presented yesterday on industrialization. It's a whole of value chain approach to renewable energy, which will be like a 3 components, as he put it. Selectivity, we then really need to be careful in choosing where we can break the ground in getting into the sector. The second element is vertical integration. How do we ensure that there is enough local content such then that Africa can move up the layer and be able to integrate into the value chain where it's more beneficial for Africa to inform its industrial revolution. The third component is the horizontal intervention. It's basically related to the policy, conducive policy environment that we talk about. It's basically to look at the ecosystem that will ensure then that we can unlock the opportunities for that. The last element I would say is that let's invest in startup incubator to enable those that will be training in the schools and so on, the reform school system that we have, to create the incubator and startup to enable the young Africans to get into the system, to learn from it, and then to create jobs, because then, as we know, that the jobs creation or opportunity for renewable is immense.
Thank you. I'll take 1 or 2 more questions before I give the panel a minute each to just wrap up. I'm told this session was cut in half, so we've got to end in the next few minutes. Any questions? There, so. Oh, at the back, was that a hand? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. Fascinating discussion. I just wanted to follow up with the gentleman on the cost of renewables. So I hear mixed stories that the upfront cost of wind and solar is high, but the marginal cost is very low. So eventually, with the falling price of solar panels and of wind turbine, that Africa will be very competitive in renewables. And the problem is maybe the grid and the transmission and the money for that. So I just wanted to know a bit more on the economics. And the second part of that is, what about places like Mpumalanga that don't have a lot of wind and that have a lot of coal, but they don't have a lot of wind and sun the same way? So what happens to parts of Africa that are not strong in solar and wind? Thank you so much.
Thank you. My question will be looking at the energy deficit in Africa. Do you think it will be better for us to be talking about looking at various energy mix, rather than only looking at renewable energy? Because there are other sources of energy that could also be explored, like nuclear technology. That also makes energy, which is the initial cost, we all know is very expensive. But after the initial cost is one of the cheapest sources of energy. And that will be very important, in terms of powering industrial development in Africa. The other issue is, for example, the renewable energy, the solar panels that we are talking about. I think it is also time for us to be able to develop the capacity to produce those, solar panels rather than relying extensively on import. because we've seen most of those technologies are being imported from outside Africa, Indo-Africa, and maintaining them in terms of the human, capacity to be able to maintain them, is becoming a challenge. I think this is another area that I think we should also be looking at that. Thank you.
Do you want to take the first one?
Thank you for that question. So the cost of technology depends on the intended use. So when we discuss, for example, the levelized cost of electricity or the capex required, it's not a very useful conversation outside of a context. And I'll give an example. Assuming you're running a factory here in Addis Ababa, you're putting together clothes for export, right? It's an EPZ. And you require the capacity of, say, 20 megawatts. If you're going to do that with solar, 20 megawatts, you have to think about what happens at night when there's no solar, right? Because if you think of how much does 20 megawatts of solar cost versus 20 megawatts of gas, then you will say 20 megawatts of solar is cheaper than gas any day. But when you think about what are you using it for? So if you want to manufacture apparels for export and you're working 24/7, for you to work with the solar, you have to install battery storage. And because you install battery storage, you'll need a higher capacity to charge the batteries. So the cost of using solar becomes very expensive very, very quickly, as opposed to using gas. So that's the misunderstanding when it comes to that comparison. So when you simply compare the capex, yes, it will be cheaper, but you have to ask yourself, what is the power intended for? And when you do that, then you start seeing other dynamics.
Thank you. Anyone wants to attempt the second question?
Not really a question, but to fully agree with the sentiment that we need to really start producing some of these products here in Africa. And that's an opportunity for micro and small and medium enterprises. So issues of technology acquisition and transfer are key. So we need to support our own to be able to produce these, because the spirit again in this forum is for Africans to produce and also to consume. So I fully agree, and actually strategies and measures should be going towards producing those products locally. Thank you.
So yes, our energy economy has to be sustainable, and it has to consider several objectives as well, including climate change. So that is why there's controversy around whether we should develop coal deposits and whether we should be using certain forms of energy. But there are other considerations as well. If you are in Rwanda, the energy mix, the off-grid energy mix has become attractive for reaching the last mile. The last few people for whom it will not be competitive to put any infrastructure. But more important, when you are looking at them, whatever solution you give, it has to compete with charcoal, price-wise, but it has to be available within about 500 meters, because any household can walk 500 meters to buy charcoal. And it has to be available almost on a pay-as-you-go basis, because people are using daily money to buy the charcoal. So that conversation is very interesting. 1 minute.
Yes, there's actually a second question that the gentleman asked, which we did not touch on. So he asked about Mpumalanga in South Africa. So South Africa gets about 80% of its electricity from coal, which is almost exactly opposite if you compare a country like Kenya or Ethiopia or DRC. And the coal value chain employs something like 1 million people. I can't remember the number from the top of my head. So what do you do with those people when thinking about transition? And it relates to the question the gentleman here in front also asked. Do we just throw away everything and say we're going green? It has to be within a context. and this is very, very important. It has to be within a context. You have to think about the realities because these are livelihoods, these are jobs. We can't just jump into this global bandwagon of green or nothing, because that may apply in some countries, but in some countries, they require a longer transition period. And one of the things, for example, that South Africa can do and is thinking about is importing more green power from the South Africa power pool from countries like Mozambique. So as you phase out the coal and as you think about what do you do with all these people and the labor, you also think about how you go green. But you can't just shut off coal and you shut off gas and say, we're going green. That does not apply in every context.
Thank you.
Well, I would say that definitely one thing to start with is to have a vision and to understand the benefit of renewable in the medium and long term, understanding then that everything will not come at the beginning. So the issue of the energy mix is important. You have a vision, you know what to do in the short term. I think really having the policies is important, and also creating the incubator, the incubator to enable our young people to start getting into this ecosystem should be some elements amongst other that I would prioritize going forward.
Thank you. I hear that Dr. Londre is now been connected online. Unfortunately, we are now wrapping up, and I'll give you a minute or two just to give some conclusion. If you've been listening to the conversation, just to give some conclude. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that we couldn't connect.
No worry, I have been following you for a while. And hello everyone. Thank you so much for the incredibly fantastic panel. I will just share a few words. I want to be mindful of a time. First, I'm grateful for your leadership, Max, and also for the contribution of the other panelists. Second, so I want to say that many of those questions which are discussed now that you have asked, Max, they are really aligned with a work that we are doing with UNDP under the leadership of UNDP Africa Director Auna Ezakonwa and the UN Chief Economist for Africa, Raymond Gilpin, and colleagues like Elijah and Rania, which really show a path for especially the Sahel, but which is valid for many of the African countries to really achieve a successful energy transition with numerous trade-offs, while also ensuring the successful progress in terms of human development. So stay tuned. The chief economist and the UNDP Africa Director will probably make announcement in the coming weeks about this. And a couple of also questions or points that I will make, so I know we are short on time. It's about, we really have a unique momentum because the problem is clear, the lack of electricity. Electricity is not, it's a fundamental right. So because it has many other implications, and the continent has been, we will not say in crisis, because to be in crisis, as said by a colleague earlier, you need to first have had enough resources. So the continent have been in an incredible deficit, but now that we have a policy, a solution, that we also, which solve a specific problems, the challenge is the political economy, the policy, and how policymaker can really join forces. On the question of how or why the risk, or why we don't see enough investment on the continent, of course, some points were mentioned, but the risk perception, the conflict, the political economy, the infrastructure gap, but we also have the regulatory environment, the capacity constraints, but the geopolitical conditions as well. So again, I'm just giving some very quick points because I know we are limited with the time here. However, an area where we really need more players is really the financing from the private sector. So we have had important financing from multilaterals, from governments, and so on. And I was really thinking that why shouldn't we more acting toward having, let's say, bonds, green loans, sustainability linked bonds or sustainability linked loan as well. So how should we have also debt for energy swaps, more forward-looking domestic resource mobilization instrument? And for that to happen, the environment, the policymaker has to really create that enabling environment for investment and policy alignment, especially when you speak about the gap between the slow speed that we have on the continent of mobilizing resource and the fast investment that we see in other regions. So policy alignment would be important, but also stronger international collaboration, both with multilateral and the global private sector, but also at the continental level, at the regional level, at the subnational level, and even at the local level. Max, I'm used to speak for many, many hours when I teach. Sometimes I have a week of executive education, but I want to be mindful of the time which is given to me here. I know that you were already concluding, and I follow the panel. I think that the insights which were shared by the colleagues were incredibly wonderful. And so I will pause here, but what I just want to end by saying, stay tuned. The extraordinary leadership of UNDP Africa has done an incredible work. Very practical, which will be announced soon by the leadership. So thank you so much again for giving me the opportunity to share some words, and looking forward to further engaging.
Thank you very much, Dr. Laundrie. He's a senior fellow at Brookings, and thanks for affirming my interest in UNDP. I'm beginning to like them some more, man. Thank you very much. 1 minute.
Okay, thank you very much. I think my parting shot is that we need to believe in ourselves. We need to, in Kenya, we believe the MSMEs are the bedrock for industrialization in our country. And the government is really very serious, and we have a fully fledged ministry responsible for that sector, because we believe that's where our push to industrialization is coming. And I think that should be across Africa. These are our people. Let's make them produce, because we are the ones consuming. Thank you very much.
And for us at UNDP, these are not just conversations we have when we come to Addis. They are conversations that we know have a grounding in the lives of the many people up and down this continent who are working with. Until these numbers and these discussions begin to matter to the likes of Marie-José, who I spoke about earlier, perhaps, and only then, perhaps, will we be able to say we've made a difference in the lives of Africans. Ladies and gentlemen, join me in thanking our esteemed panel here. I hope you have enjoyed the discussion.